All right, the topic many of you have been waiting for, financial aid and scholarships. First, let's get a better understanding of the current college costs. I like to start by looking at the sticker price. This is known as the cost of attendance. It is made up of direct charges, those charges charged directly by the institution. That's things like tuition and required fees, and for students living on campus, also room and board. And then there's also indirect charges. Those are charges that are not charged directly by the university, but that you do need to budget for, things like books, transportation to campus, health insurance, other types of expenses. Your financial aid eligibility is based upon this larger figure, the cost of attendance. The most variation in charges for universities, though, is in the direct charges, the charges that are actually on the bill, charged by the university. You'll see below kind of a sampling of different prices to give you an idea about what we're talking about for different schools. If we boil this all down and we take all of that and we turn it into a cost of attendance, I would tell you that the cost of attendance for a four-year school varies from about $35,000 or so for an in-state public institution up to about $80,000 or so, and covering every number in between. Now let's move on to types of aid. First, we've got merit-based aid. Merit-based aid is based upon the student's previous accomplishments, and in the case of universities that are offering merit-based aid, also what they have to offer to that school. Not every institution offers merit-based aid, so that's important to know. For those that do, they are going to determine based on their own institutional priorities how they calculate, how they determine who gets how much money. And so that could be based upon a whole application package. It could be based upon demographics. It could be based upon special talents, leadership, academics. Also, especially for public institutions, they'll be taking into account your state of residence. Are you an in-state student or an out-of-state student? And there are different merit aid packages or scholarships available to those two different groups. Some schools, everybody who applies is automatically considered for scholarship. Often the deadlines for that are pretty early. So for example, Maryland, one of our most popular schools, as long as you apply by the November 1st deadline for admission, you're automatically considered for merit scholarship. For others, you must apply. So an example there is Virginia Tech. They have a certain deadline by which you must complete a scholarship application if you intend to be considered for scholarship. In general, the dollar amounts are going to be significantly more generous at private colleges and universities. Public institutions have far more limited institutional funds, and they do prioritize those funds to students who are in state. So you are, for the most part, more likely to receive merit scholarship from an in-state school, though not everyone. Just because you qualify for $10,000 at Ramapo doesn't mean you'll get that from Rutgers. It depends upon the school and how you fall within that school's admission pool. But in general, you'll find you'll be eligible for more from an in-state public university than an out-of-state public university. There are a few notable exceptions that are historically pretty generous. Then we've got need-based aid. That is based upon the information that you provide on your financial aid application or applications, depending upon the school. That's going to include loans, which is money that you'll pay back either starting right away or after graduation. It might also include grants, federal, state, or institutional, and perhaps also federal work study. Deadlines vary here, but it's important to know that they also might vary by how you're applying to the university. So a student who's applying early decision or early action may very well find that there is also an early financial aid application deadline, and it could be as early as November 1st. So you do need to pay attention, because otherwise you're going to find that you're not getting anything because you didn't meet the deadlines. The two main application forms out there are the FAFSA and the CSS Profile. The FAFSA is run by the federal government. The CSS Profile is run by the College Board. Accordingly, the FAFSA is free. The CSS Profile costs money for you to file. Pretty much every school out there will require you to submit the FAFSA in order to be considered for need-based aid. A subset of schools, a smaller group of schools, also require the CSS Profile. Easiest way to find it, other than on the school website, is Google CSS Profile Schools. It's pretty much always the first link that pops up. You can start filling these out beginning on October 1st of the senior year. And there are some details between them. different types of requirements, but I don't want to get too much into them here. I'm sure we can address them in the Q&A. Know that the CSS profile is very detailed, very thorough, will take you far longer to complete. That is the one where I say that they are picking up your mattress and looking for your money. The FAFSA uses principally the information on your 2020 tax return along with a couple of other details. That'll take you about an hour to file. You should know if you are looking at applying for financial aid, there's no big changes for next year, but there are big changes coming for the year after that in particular will impact those of you who will have multiple children in college beginning in the 2023-2024 school year. There are a lot of complications out there, so it is important that if it is a student who doesn't live with their two birth parents who are still married, that you get a good understanding ahead of time of whose information needs to be provided on the different forms, on both the FAFSA and the CSS, as that may affect where you choose to apply to schools, depending on who you live with and who has different financial situations. The FAFSA is not that hard for most. My recommendation for you at this point in time is that as you are filing your taxes right now for the 2020 year, all of the information that you have, put it together in a file folder or in a manila folder so that when we get to October, you've already got all of that information together, and then you can just hop online and get your current bank account balances. But you'll already have all of that tax type information with you. You'll have to, at that point, you'll be able to indicate which colleges the student is applying to, and you'll also, for most of you, be able to link in and retrieve the IRS data. So it is easier than it used to be back when we all applied with paper and pencil and typewriter. So how does it in general work? You fill out the FAFSA, the federal government processes that FAFSA, they return to you a student aid report. It comes by email. That has on it one important piece of information, the estimated family contribution. That is how much the federal government alleges you can pay for each year of college for that student. Colleges receive all of the same data that is on the student aid report. What you won't see on that student aid report is how much financial aid you're eligible for, because that is a school-specific decision. At any point, you can update the FAFSA if you realize that you made some errors and you need to add more schools. Each of those schools that uses only the FAFSA for financial aid determination is going to use that EFC to calculate something called demonstrated need. To do that, they are going to take that cost of attendance of the school. That was the direct and indirect costs, remember. They're going to subtract out your estimated family contribution, how much the government says you can pay, and they're going to get from that figure a demonstrated need. That number could be zero, or it could be negative. Or it could be a positive number. It depends upon you and your family situation. CSS profile schools are also going to factor in additional info from the CSS as they calculate your demonstrated need and determine your aid eligibility at their schools. Now, note that schools are not required to fill that demonstrated need or that gap between the cost of attendance and the estimated family contribution. If that number is $40,000, many schools are not going to give you aid in the amount of $40,000. The schools that will, they are generally called schools that meet demonstrated need. They are a very small subset overall of the schools that are out there, and most of them are highly selective. So if a school is looking to meet as much of that demonstrated need as they can use merit-based aid and also need-based aid to get there. And that will typically include loans for the vast majority of schools. Now, you'll get a financial aid package only after you have been offered admission, or sometimes right at the same time, but you won't get it beforehand. So you're waiting until a little bit later. Then you may have a financial aid appeal that is in play. It depends upon your situation. Those are generally most successful for students whose financial situation has changed. Perhaps parents had job loss or some other big change in 2021. They were using only 2020 data. They don't know about it. You appeal based on it. They can perhaps adjust that financial aid package. There are other reasons for appeals as well. This is a sample financial aid award letter from a school. You'll see a cost of attendance here, a financial aid package. This is what the school is offering up here. Now, let me be very honest. If we are talking about a Hillsborough student and you consider yourself middle of the road Hillsborough or above, you are talking about receiving these loans here. and you will not receive an SEOG grant. You will not receive a Pell Grant if you would consider yourself middle of the range, Hillsborough above. Those Pell Grants start with estimated family contributions that are in kind of the mid 4 figures or so. So you're really relying on things like scholarships, institutional money, and then the grants. And then it comes down to what your estimated yearly balance will be. And it is important to know this up front. And so not every school offers those grants. So it's important to know kind of where do you fall in regards to estimated family contribution. Are you going to be eligible for some of these other things here? Because if you're not, then you need to be looking at schools that are going to be offering you institutional merit-based aid. For those of you students who may not be U.S. citizens or permanent residents, you might be here on a non-immigrant visa, you might be here as an undocumented student. This is an overall sampling of what types of aid that you might be eligible for so that you can determine a little bit more what might be the best strategy for you in applying to schools in state or out of state, etc. What are some great resources to be using? I highly recommend that every student and family utilize net price calculators. Those are found on every school's website, and they're also found in the SCORE Parent View. I would probably, if you're just doing kind of some quick ones just to get a sampling, then go ahead and use that SCORE Parent View. But at the end of the day, I want you to use the ones that are on the school websites, especially if you are applying early decision. That will give you an idea based upon your financial aid situation. How much aid can you expect to get at that institution? There are a couple of EFC calculators out there. There's a FAFSA forecaster, and there's also one on the College Board site. Those can be good to do to get an idea about what your estimated family contribution is. There's also an NJEI calculator, which is your New Jersey Eligibility Index, to determine if you're eligible for state aid as well. And finally, I'd very highly recommend our financial aid night presentation. We do have a recording from last fall. It's on my YouTube. It's also on the College and Career Counseling website on the presentations page. All of our past presentations are there. And so it will delineate for you underneath where I have the presentation. You'll see kind of all the stopping points so that you can start at whatever point you want within the presentation based on information you want to know. We do hold a financial aid night presentation each year, so you'll expect another one coming up this fall. Now, in terms of scholarships, it's important to know that most scholarships are for seniors. There are some junior awards out there, but they are really few and far between. They tend to be essay contests or otherwise based on a lottery style. There are a couple of big ones. They are very, very highly selective. And by very, very highly selective, I'm talking about fewer than 1% of those that apply receive the scholarship. And so that's kind of what's out there for junior year for the most part. So what to be looking for at this point is as you are working on that college list, you want to be looking at the college and university scholarships that are available and if the student would be eligible there. But these will be the other sources for scholarships. There'll be national, regional, local, HHS only scholarships. And as you move into the senior year, you'll find that I do notify students of all those types of awards. I have postings on our website. You can explore them now. There's a section there, scholarships for seniors, if you want to get an idea about what it looks like. And then I've got some other resources that are highlighted on my website and mentioned here as well. In general, don't pay to apply for scholarships. And if it seems sketchy, it probably is. So remember that if it is asking for what you feel like is an awful lot of personal information. We do offer scholarships specifically for Hillsborough High School students. That application process is in the spring of the student's senior year. So we just opened it up this week for our seniors. And so this is, kind of the time frame that you should be looking at for next year. Those are posted online now if you want to get an idea about what's out there right now. For current seniors, know that it could change next year. Those do vary from year to year, depending upon our donors' funding availability. So what can you do now? One, I cannot implore you enough to, as a family, discuss what is financially realistic. Do not wait to have that conversation after a student has fallen in love with schools. Do not wait to have that conversation until after a student has been admitted, because it is a much tougher conversation to have then. You need to have it up front so that the list takes into account financial factors. I encourage you to use an EFC calculator to figure out what the federal government thinks you can contribute. I can give you the news flash now. It's probably going to be a higher number than you think you can contribute. Use net price calculators now, and I advise you to look at them in a variety of schools: in-state publics, in-state privates, out-of-state publics, and out-of-state privates, and especially different price points as well, because you might find that there's different aid eligibility based upon those price points. Because remember, that cost of attendance varies a lot. Look, as you're putting schools on the list, note the merit scholarship criteria. What kinds of GPAs, what percentage of students are receiving them? Is the student likely to be eligible? And what's the deadline and how do you apply for them? Make sure that as you're shaping that list, you're applying to schools that match your financial needs as well. You might have some schools that are a little bit more of a reach financially, and that's okay, just like it is for admission, but you don't, again, want a whole list that is filled with schools that at the end of the day is going to leave you with a net price, an out-of-pocket cost that is far more than you can reasonably handle as a family. And as you're looking at scholarship students and you see some scholarships out there that, they're for seniors right now, go ahead and bookmark them. Start a bookmarks folder, a Google Doc, Google Sheet. If you see like, oh, hey, I'd be eligible for this scholarship, jot it down now so that next year when we get to this time, you already have a big head start and you just need to fill out the applications. So that's it, folks. We have made it to the end of our all of our videos, and I look forward to seeing folks in the Q&A sessions, and we will be moving on to smaller, shorter videos, topical things, and working with our students throughout the remainder of the spring.